This massive abandoned factory contaminated the water supply.
Urgent health warning for you in Kalamazoo County this morning. Don't drink the water in Parchment.
It was in July 2018 in the city of Parchment, Michigan, when the abandoned Kalamazoo Vegetable Parchment paper mill was suspected of the contamination.
How long has this been going on, and how much have we been exposed to it?
But was this huge, shut-down, decaying plant really to blame?
The state is focusing on a long-closed paper mill and a neighboring dump as a source for the PFAS in Parchment.
When I visited the site a few months ago, I was captivated by just how big this campus was.
This is what abandoned exploring is all about.
I had originally planned on just making a short video about how cool this place was to explore, the history, and whether it may or may not be demolished. You know, because that's what we usually do. But the more that I dug into the research, it quickly became so much more than that. This place has so much history, like the fact that this was a company town. And the whole reason that the town of Parchment even exists is because the factory wanted their employees and their families to live in the surrounding area. Company towns like this were pretty common in the early 1900s. It's like Hershey, Pennsylvania, which I think they made chocolate?
Hershey is the great American chocolate bar.
Or Goodyear, Arizona, which was founded by Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company to grow cotton for the tire cord during World War I. So Parchment had a lot going for it, and it grew quickly. But even after the plant was abandoned in the early 2000s, more and more problems started surfacing about what really went on here.
Yeah, I worked there for 35 years. The water that come out of there was nasty. And where did it go? I don't know. I never knew where it went.
And believe me when I tell you that I found over 100 sources on this entire topic, so I became pretty obsessed. Now with all that in mind, let's go on an adventure and explore the Kalamazoo Vegetable Parchment Company. Many were quick to blame this place because there were so many unknowns. Like how many chemicals were still inside, how were they disposed of, and of course, were any of the buildings leaking something? So what exactly is a town to do with a situation like this?
We have to make sure that everything is done correctly also. So everything from how to flush and discharge the water from the current system to how to hook up to a new system and ensure that the new system works well with the old infrastructure.
But for many, there was another question. What do they do with this gigantic and potentially hazardous campus? Demolish it? Wait for a developer to come and restore it? Well, that's one of the main reasons I traveled there myself, to get a first-hand look at what all was left behind, explore its history, and to find out what the conditions were to see what could be done.
I am not going down there.
While walking around the remains of this old paper mill, I was surrounded by massive machinery that was overgrown with moss and ivy, old equipment, gigantic factory rooms, and the ruins of what was once the world's model paper mill. This site was the backbone of a whole community, and if you've ever used parchment paper, well, that originated here. It all started in 1909 when Jacob Kindleberger, aka Uncle Jake, arrived at an abandoned sugar beet factory along the Kalamazoo River. He saw potential in the site, I guess kind of like how I can imagine what these ruins might have looked like when they were up and running.
There's probably a piece of machinery right there.
And in that empty shell of a building, he built the Kalamazoo Vegetable Parchment Company, or as the locals call it, KVP. But the start of this company wasn't easy, and that's because the old sugar beet factory was a long trek from the nearby Kalamazoo. During the first few years, most of the workers would walk to and from the factory on a road along the Kalamazoo River that was virtually impassable during certain times of the year. Some workers even lived in tents along the riverbank just outside the building. And we know this because all of this info comes straight from Uncle Jake himself through an expansive 30-page history of KVP, which when I found it, it felt more like I was reading a terminal entry in Fallout. Just a huge direct lore dump. But anyways, in chapter 12 of this document, entitled Our Third Year, Jacob describes the beginning of the town.
As the company kept growing, it was very apparent that we needed houses for at least some of our employees so they could live close to the mill. About a half-dozen families were living on the riverbank at that time in tents. After these houses were completed, the place began to look like the beginning of a little town. Cherry Boldman, Big Bo as he's usually called, who had been living in one of the little tents, christened the little town Googieville. After more houses were added, the town was automatically called Parchment, and it carries that name to this day.
The company went on to build over 50 houses, paved the streets, and provided fire protection. And they built a massive community house that acted as a gymnasium, a cafeteria, and a church that became a social hub. Uncle Jake was a deeply religious man, and he wanted to instill those principles in his workforce. For example, drinking was prohibited. But he still wanted his workforce to feel happy in their personal lives, so he offered alternatives, like forming a company baseball team. Because I don't know about you, but when I come home from a long, grueling week at the factory, that's exactly what I want to do instead of drinking. Which, don't get me wrong, I like baseball just as much as the next person, but I personally don't think is a good replacement. But anyways, for what it's worth, they ended up playing exhibition games against teams like the Detroit Tigers and the New York Yankees at Kindleberg Park, which was a 38-acre gift from Uncle Jake himself. At its peak, the mill employed over 2,400 people, and the city's identity was inseparable from the paper it produced. And parchment paper wasn't the only product it made either. They also produced the silicone liners for the original plastic Band-Aids, and Uncle Jake once turned nearly 100 pounds of waste paper into profitable luxury wrapping paper that they called cloth white. But as you can see, that glory faded.
And I am here today to tell you about the end of an era in the city of Parchment.
As the mill struggled to stay afloat, it went through several different owners, like the James River Group, and finally Crown Vantage, right before shutting its doors for the last time in 2000.
Last fall, it was announced that Crown Vantage had sold the parchmentizing operation to Cybelle Dahl of France, who had bought the business but will not manufacture paper in this area. The parchmentizing equipment will be removed and there will be no more parchment made in this area.
And with this end of an era came one major question.
What should be done with all the huge facilities left abandoned to rot?
When this mill was started, they made the pulp where the trees were, and then they shipped it down to mills like this all over the country.
Now bigger and faster machines can make paper right at the clearing site, making mills like this obsolete.
Then, several years after the plant closed, they did demolish a small portion of the plant,
making way for a future mixed-use development featuring commercial, retail, and residential buildings, and many say much-needed progress.
But even with that, it took 2 whole decades after the mill closed to find the true culprit of that contamination that was silently spreading and growing while no one was watching.
It has been 24 hours now since health officials shut the water taps off in Parchment.
That's when in July 2018, the town that the paper built was suddenly told that its water was toxic. Testing revealed high levels of PFAS, contaminants that pose a serious risk to human health. At levels as high as 1,400 parts per trillion, roughly 20 times the EPA's lifetime health advisory. For weeks, 3,000 residents relied on 14,000 cases of donated bottled water handed out by local volunteers.
Obviously, that old paper mill is probably the most likely source.
But was this decaying giant really the source of the chemicals?
How long have the residents been drinking the contaminated water?
I think right now it's going to be based on getting additional data to understand the source. So the Department of Environmental Quality is going to go out and try to find where did this come from.
As I walked the perimeter and did more research, well, the short answer is yes. Because behind the mill sits an 82-acre dump. Now, it just looks like a series of hills that look natural, but actually are composed of decades of paper sludge. Investigators believed that the sludge, which was all waste from the papermaking process, leached the chemicals directly into the groundwater and the city's 3 wells located less than a mile away.
Fike, that former paper mill worker, has lived most of his life next to that dump.
This is flat. This is all stuff that they had dumped in here.
He used to be able to see the Kalamazoo River from here, but now hills made of paper sludge block his view.
It was more of a sludge pulp type stuff that went in there.
But how exactly did the PFAS get into the paper sludge?
Now they're drinking bottled water and waiting for answers.
I have to open so many bottles of water during the day.
Well, as it turns out, the process that made KVP's product so revolutionary was a spray waterproof coating that they would put on the paper.
At the side press, a release treatment known as Quillon will be added. This paper will also be used as a bakery tray liner,
which was later found out, as you probably guessed, to be linked to PFAS.
This is the last washer vat. The next vat applies a solution of plasticizer to make the finished sheet more flexible.
But in doing more research, I found out that KVP had a much better process when it first started. Starting in 1929, KVP filtered Kalamazoo River water right there on site before it ever touched the paper machines, and the parchment process itself was actually recycled, which was over 90% of the sulfuric acid they used. So they didn't have to throw it away or dump it somewhere. But somewhere along the way, that changed, because the mill tore out the river filtration plant and switched over to well water, which was the same aquifer that the town's drinking wells was pulled from. And as the company expanded into wax paper, pizza boxes, bakery liners, that's when they started spraying the waterproof onto the paper. The chemicals were designed to be persistent, made to never break down. And instead of recycling everything like they did before, the spray waterproof coating made it to where they couldn't. So they had to dump it all somewhere.
This is the pulp after it is bleached.
But mills all over America were doing the same thing, so no one ever thought it was going to be a problem.
Is it possible that that system will ever be safe to use again, or will they have to find a whole new well?
The town of Parchment was not only defined by the product that they made, but now is trapped by a chemical produced by the namesake that they can't get rid of, which is what led them to permanently cap the city's water wells.
The city of Kalamazoo will connect residents on the city of Parchment's water system to the city of Kalamazoo's water supply system.
Under the agreement, Parchment will pay about $216,000 for a year's supply of clean water.
So had they continued the process where they filtered their water, they wouldn't be left with this huge, expensive mess to clean up. But now that they know about it, what are they gonna do with the big dump or the huge abandoned factory that caused it?
The plan alone was responsible for 50% of the city's tax base.
Well, today, the buildings are a magnet for arsonists and looters.
This site has caught on fire multiple times in the last year.
The fate of the building was decided in a $100 million demolition and renovation project to make way for a 100-acre mixed-use development site for new business ventures. Tear down the old and put up something new.
And the mayor says that this project will double its tax base. It will take several years to complete.
But as I was walking around the property, past the crumbling walls and rotting machinery, it seemed to me like the Parchment City leaders were just putting a Band-Aid on the situation. Ironically, like the ones they used to produce here. And I'm definitely not the only one who thinks this, because many locals are getting the sense that the chemical footprint is simply being glossed over. Though the toxic sludge dump is less than a mile away, was never really fully dealt with, and continues to leach into the aquifer.
We need funding and focus to be on basic human needs, which are safe drinking water, to make sure that our food is safe.
While 3,000 people on the municipal system now have safe water from Kalamazoo, those on private wells have been left with a stopgap measure, $200 kitchen sink filters that only treat water at a single tap.
The state is paying for the filters along with a year's worth of replacement filters.
I don't like it. I think that plume's going to just go further and further.
If you're picking something out of a garden, you got to clean it off with bottled water.
These residents are deeply frustrated, feeling like their well-being and safety is secondary to the city's tax base. And it's hard not to wonder if the path to demolition and new construction was the only answer. The city leaders could have looked for a private investor or someone to buy the land and help clean up the PFAS behind with grants. But instead, rather than a comprehensive environmental restoration for the entire 100-acre footprint, while the Colorado partnership that owns the land has stalled on development, the city is stepping in with its own tax dollars to fund the demolition and roads, chasing a $100 vision that could double the tax base and finally bring the city back to life. And the last time that I checked, this abandoned mill that was once the world's model mill is still sitting there completely empty because demolition plans keep getting stalled, which tells me that maybe there's an opportunity for a private developer to come in and find a different use for the old building. I love historic preservation, and I really think that this space could be reutilized as something else, but that would require someone to come in with a vision. And there are hundreds of thousands of abandoned buildings all across America that can cause problems like this. And those are the types of stories I love to investigate. So if you want to see any more like that, just click this video right here or check out the rest of our channel.